Welcome to this week's episode of Virtually Amazing Assistants, the podcast for assistants everywhere. And if you haven't met me before, I'm Shelley Fishel, known as the MS Office Maestro. And I am really thrilled today to have with me the wonderful and amazing Jules Taylor. And I've known Jules for more or less since I started Tomorrow's VA. She's one of the first people to connect with me, which is really, really nice. And she's been really helpful to me as well over the several years that we've known each other. And I hope I've helped her a bit too. So let me give you a summary of who Jules is. So Jules is a virtual PA, and she's got way over 5 years of experience providing PA and HR admin across various sectors. And she works with lots of different people. It's really diverse. Things like, I'm looking at my crib sheet as usual for listeners, I'm about to say readers, but I meant listeners, including charities, management consultants, FinTech, and equity, diversity, and inclusion. Quite a broad range of clients. Perhaps we can chat about that a bit later. She also, before that, she was an executive PA in London for 12 years, including 9 years with the good old Marks and Spencers. We can have a bit of a chat about that as well. Jules also works as a freelance travel agent, which makes her very different to any of the other virtual assistants that I've interviewed so far, or that are on my list of people to interview coming up. So you are very special, Jules. And she enjoys traveling, of course. And she's volunteered also at major sporting events, including the London 2012 Olympics and Euro 2020. So, Jules, what did I miss? Is there anything you'd like to add?
Oh, I don't know. I think you did capture it all. I mean, obviously, I started my career as a travel agent, so it's not something that's been new to me since I went freelance. It's how I started. If anything, the PA work came on the back of my travel career. And it was the skills from the administration of travel that led me to becoming a PA. So it's kind of been interlinked really the whole way through my career.
Oh, that's really good. And I think it kind of highlights that all of our skills, whatever we do in life, we can bring to whatever we do next. Sometimes we don't think of that and we think, oh, I can't do that because I don't have X, Y, Z qualifications. But I think we have life qualifications, which are just as important and sometimes more important, because that common sense approach is not something that you can necessarily learn. You've either got it or you haven't, I think. What do you think?
Absolutely. You can have the most intelligent person, but that doesn't mean they have common sense. I definitely thought in that logical, for me, things have to make sense and just be logical for me to understand. And if things aren't logical, I'm like, get it, because it's not logic. Things to me have to be logical to make sense.
Yeah, and that's where what I love about what I do, because I take the software that I teach and I make it make sense to somebody who can't see the logic in it, which is, it's a really cool place to be in, because I get to play with software and I get to play with gadgets, which are things that I like. And I get to help people as well, which is also great. So Jules, very, very varied career. Now, what was the bit that I didn't, that I wanted to ask you about? FinTech, equity, diversity and inclusion and management consulting. Are they connected, do you think? Or are they very different?
No, they are, I think, very different. And it changed the longer I've been sort of working my own business. So I've been officially in business coming up 6 years. It's 7 years, not 7 years next year since I set up the business, but 6 years since I've been properly trading. And I think at one point, everything was very HR, EDI, and in that space, even the sort of consultancy. And I think the majority of the people I do work with tend to lead from a consultancy angle somewhere, I tend to find. But there's no rhyme or reason. I think for me, I always take it back to my PA background. And when I'm looking to work with new clients, working with someone where I can use my PA EA skill is kind of where I'm looking to grow the business. And that kind of where it leads from. The HR side of things, we talked about Marks and Spencer, but I worked in the HR team there as a PA. So I think what I learned more than I realized in the 9 years I was there. I think the HR skills and the kind of, again, it's a logical kind of piece in the fact that when I'm working with sometimes small business owners, and a lot of them will be people that have started a consultancy to work for themselves and then grown and they've now got a team and they've now got maybe associates working for them. Me coming in with that kind of corporate HR side of things, going, do you have contracts in place for your team? How are you monitoring the holiday? How are we putting this into play? If you've got a team that are now employees, where are the policies coming from? And I'm very lucky then because I worked in HR and because of some of the people I've worked in HR gone on to run consultancies themselves, I've got good contact that I can go to and say, right, I've got a client that's now growing a team. I need advice on this, or I need someone that can come in and deliver. For example, we had someone that needed a visa. So I needed out my skill set with the HR admin side of things. So I could go to my network and say, right, who can deliver this piece of work for me for a client? So I think the HR side of it came quite naturally in the background I had and my knowledge of working within an HR team, combined with you're working with small growing businesses that don't have that HR function in place.
I think that's quite important because it's not something that you think about when you start your business. I know one of the first things I was thinking about before I took on any associates or did anything was I did actually go and consult with a lawyer and I sat down and we worked out what kind of contracts I needed to protect me and to protect them. So we had associate contracts, what I could expect from them, what they could expect from me, all that kind of thing. And that was really, really important. But had I have actually employed them, I think that would have been a whole other question. And I think having that ability to go to somebody who knows about HR is really important because there are lots of things that you could put your foot in it, can't you?
Absolutely. And in it is sometimes one of my clients going back in the past had grown really because of circumstantial background, had grown really quickly and were growing the team. So as we were growing the team, I was like, right, so what contracts have we got in place for them? What can we do? And we got contracts in. So all the new ones coming in, we put contracts in place and we checked this. But on the back of that, we then had to look at people they'd been working with and were still working with and said, right, we don't have contracts for these in place. So and it was things like consultants that are working without insurance, consultants that were perhaps working without ICO registration, where I think again, people I think sometimes start off doing it very quickly, and as they grow, they can't keep up almost. Um,
Yeah.
so a lot of it come from sort of things like that, where I've gone right. I know from working in an HR team, you need to know that they're the right to work kind of situation, even if they're an associate. Do they have the correct things in place? So quite scary how the amount of consultants out there that are working in various different sort of organizations and different sectors that don't really have contracts in place.
Yeah, yeah, it's yeah, that is quite scary. I'm quite hot on having what I call them booking terms with my clients. So once we've agreed, we do a whole lot of back and forth until we agree what the content is going to be delivered. But once that's agreed, then the booking terms go out and they're quite explicit and quite structured and very logical.
Yeah.
So we've got that in common, which is really, really
Logic.
cool. So how does the freelance travel agent, you said before that the PA work came on the back of that. So I presume you arranged some travel for somebody and they said, oh, can you just do this for me as well? Is that how it happened?
Is completely a bizarre one. I left travel very briefly because I was offered a job working in football. That's probably the enormity in all this, doing something similar to what I was doing in travel, but I was randomly offered this job in football. And I just thought it was an opportunity that might never come again. I didn't want to regret not trying something different. So I worked in football for a year. The end of the year, I wasn't quite sure what to do next. And I was in that kind of crossroads of, did I go to looking? I hadn't worked as a travel agent, but that worked about 5 years. I'd been working in business development in travel. So did I go back to travel agencies? Did I get to the business development in travel? Did I look to continue in football? And I was at that real, I'd been made redundant. So I was at that real kind of like, I wanted to make an informed choice and not make a decision based on needing to make the decision. So I did what everybody does in that situation. And in back then it was a lot easier. And I went and temped in London and I started off with Office Angels working on their sit and wait service. And if I'm honest, I realised that the PAs were paid more than the administrators, and I was working as an administrator. And I'd had a PA in my role in business development. So I knew that I'd organised my own diary in conjunction with a PA that gave us the admin support. So I was like, well, I could do that myself because I mean, I've had things. So Office Angels weren't quite so sure. But I got really lucky one day. I was there on the sit and wait service. A job came in to work for a CEO of a nursery school chain. And I was basically the only person they could send on the job. So I think with, I think it was the luck on their side, they sent me out and he was fantastic. I loved the job. He actually offered me a permanent job, but unfortunately he really wanted a part-time PA, which I couldn't afford to take. So on the back of that feedback, that they started sending me out on the PA roles, and I got a few weeks later, I got a 9-month maternity contract. And on the back of that maternity contract, I went into Marks and Spencer's on another maternity contract and stayed 9 years instead of 9 months.
Amazing. That's absolutely amazing.
Actually, those transferable admin skills from base the admin. I mean, people don't realise there's a lot of admin in booking a holiday. So it was that transferable skills from managing my time as a business development manager, and obviously the administration that goes with booking a holiday, that sort of led me to ending up as a
Well, that leads me into my next question, which is, what made you leave the executive PA role at M&S and go it alone?
I became disillusioned how PAs were used corporately, lack of training, lack of personal development. And I, I wasn't really sure what my next move was going to be. I'd been there, as I said, I'd been there probably around 8 years, the time that my thought started. And I've always had a mortgage that I've always paid for by myself. So I've always had like a lot of financial concern, I guess. And I went to the PA show in 2018, and I got chatting to a virtual assistant called Claire Grace, who I think you know. And there was something in that conversation that made me realize, hey, doing it by myself was a possibility. And I'd then be in control of my own personal development, in my own life and destiny, I guess. And on literally on the back of that conversation, I think it was the 28th of February, and literally I bought my domain for the business on the 1st of March. But being quite the person I am, and I wanted to do it properly, and I did a lot of research, and I had the domain, but I started joining in, which I think is probably how I first came about you. I think I started joining VA group and VA training and looking at ways of sort of self-development, and whether this was a real viable option. And I wasn't going to end up going to my dad and saying, help me pay my mortgage, please, which was really not an option. So as it happened, about three or 4 months into setting up the business and starting the background side of things, I got headhunted for another PA role on LinkedIn. So I took that as an opportunity to say, right, do I really want to do this and be self-employed, or do I just need to be, I've been at M&S too long and I just need to change? Yeah. And it quite clear very quickly into the new role that I really wanted to go into, do it myself and give it a go. And I got lucky in the fact that I'd been in the role about 6 months, and my boss was promoted into a group role. I was looking after the UK and Ireland CEO, and he got promoted to the group role, which had a PA in situ. So the idea was that they wanted me to stay and look after what would be the incoming CEO. They didn't have that person in mind. I'd been employed on a personality fit, and I was just like, I think it's the right time. Like, do you know what I mean? Because I'd been there less than a year, I hadn't got much notice to give. So I just took it as the sign that it was time to do it. So I literally made that call and was like, right, I'm going to do this. And actually never really looked back. I mean, during COVID, I thought I'd lost my mind. I was 9 months in. I think everybody did. Well, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, again, that's to that year. So I think it was, I guess it was a bit longer than 9 months, but it was, so I'd gone live the end of the April and obviously COVID, so it was 11 months. So I did think I wasn't fully booked. And I obviously launched the travel side of things, which obviously travel died. And I did sit and think, oh my God, I could be working in London or further. And instead I'm poetry on.
Oh, but you think because one of the things that's come up in other interviews that I've done, whether they've been released already or whether they're going to be released in the future, because I've been lucky enough to interview quite a lot of people and get those sessions recorded, is the people that I've said, what would your tip be? And mostly have said, do your research. So I think, you did that logic, because that comes from a logical point of view, and you did your research first so that when push came to shove, literally, you at least knew what was possible.
Spoken to a lot of corporate PAs in the last 6 years that think this is an easy option. They don't need to they could just go and sort of like, I don't know, buy a contract tomorrow and set themselves up and that's the end of it and they can just. I don't think a lot of people realize how hard you have to work to do this.
Yeah, I think partly that's because something that when I interviewed Lucy Brazier for the first iteration of the podcast, which was virtually amazing, which has been about 4 years ago now, and she's coming on the podcast in a few weeks' time. But we talked about it, and we were talking about the difference between a corporate PA/EA, if I use the term assistant to mean both of those, and a virtual assistant. The big, big, big difference between the two is a virtual assistant is also a business owner. So you haven't got that work guaranteed. If you're in a corporate role, the work's there unless they sack you or you leave or something happens like with you, somebody gets promoted and your job kind of changes. But as a business owner, that work's never guaranteed. So you've got to go, you're always,
When you're corporate, you toe the corporate line. You know what the rules are, you know what the regulations are, you know what path you've got to follow. When you're running your own business as an assistant, and I use the term virtual assistant loosely, if people ask what I do, I always tell them I'm a PA, I'm an EA, I'm a freelance PA, for me, virtual assistant is the way of working. It's not the job.
yeah.
I am still a PA. I'm just not a corporate PA. I'm a freelance PA. And I think actually and I had that conversation with one of my clients recently in the fact, actually, I think as a business owner myself, and all of a sudden you know about costs and you know about spend and you know that every penny I spend on the business means it's not money coming into my pocket to pay me or business that I can invest in other things. It makes you much more conscious when you're helping someone. Because at the end of the day, as a virtual PA, you're tending to work with smaller businesses and you are helping them run their business in a lot of cases. And you're helping them make strategic decisions and help them sort of work through what their next phase of their business is and what their next thing is. When you've got added mindset because you know that you're doing it as a business owner, and if they're spending that much money, you know that if they're spending money on that, it's taking money away from it. Well, I think you have much more focus on that as a business owner than you do as a corporate PA, because as a corporate PA, you just see a budget and you just see, or in my case, as a corporate PA, you don't see the budget because you're a corporate PA. But do you know what I mean? You've got that
Yeah.
understanding of the budgets and the money and the spend. And if you spend money on that, you haven't got the money to spend money on that. And if you spend money on that, you can't necessarily pay yourself then. So you do come from it from a very different angle when you're a self-employed business owner than just a corporate PA. And I don't like
Absolutely.
but you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I don't like the word just. And sometimes I say, you're just an assistant, but no, you're not just an assistant. I know, see that played out on LinkedIn quite a lot lately. This kind of, oh, she's just a secretary, or she's just an assistant. And yeah, I think that everything you've said is true. And I think that small businesses, when they hire a virtual PAEA assistant, an assistant who works virtually, and I think that really is what a virtual assistant is, because I've spoken to many, many assistants, and everybody has a different speciality. You may have HR and travel in your pocketbook, and somebody else will have something completely different.
I was to say,
And
that's
so,
why, for example, I don't go to networking where there's professional lockouts, because there's no point locking out the virtual assistant, because that's how they do it. They base it on the virtual assistant role.
yeah,
And if they lock out another virtual assistant, then I'm being directed to business that I don't offer. So virtual assistant falls under bookkeeping. They sometimes make an allowance for, but a virtual assistant can be anything from a bookkeeper, email marketing, social media. I don't offer any of those services. Therefore, by having me in the room as the virtual assistant, there's no point recommending me as the virtual assistant if I don't offer the services, because I'm very much an EA, and hence the name of the business has PA in it. I chose not to use VA, and I chose because it is all about PA, or, I mean, it could have been tailor-made EA, I guess, but
yeah,
I think PA is probably a more recognizable term. That's, that's a whole nother
yeah.
talk.
No, I think you're right.
I-
I think you're right. Although it's also very interesting how I've noticed in different parts of the world, the term PA and EA is used interchangeably. So I'm doing some work with an international organization next year that's booked in.
Definitely.
And
All that. She has done, in conjunction with Hannah Monument, some amazing work on defining PA, EA, admin assistant role, and what it looks like. Because you're absolutely right. People don't understand the difference between the PA, the EA, and I think the VA role coming in has just probably confused people even more. And that is a
yeah,
huge, and, and where the problem is in the corporate world is the fact that you've got recruiters out there recruiting PA, EA roles, and they don't really understand the role themselves. And there's that whole
yeah,
thing about businesses don't understand the difference between PA and EA, and they'll employ people and just someone says, "Oh, I want to be an EA, not a PA," and they say, "Okay," not looking at actually what the job involves. And I think I work far more as an EA working virtually than I did corporately, because you're so, again, it goes that whole, you're so much structured into position as a PA in a corporate role. It is much more sometimes the PA role, whereas I work much more as an EA, despite the name of my business, as a freelance business owner than I did before. I personally think.
I think this is a whole really interesting discussion. So I actually have another question for you, and it's related to the travel one. What's the most exciting holiday you've ever, or the most, I don't know, exciting, expensive, luxury, whatever you sport, whatever you want to throw into the mix? What's the
Australia,
most exciting way you've ever organised?
always my favourite thing to book. Even back in the 90s when I was a travel agent on the high street, I was always a Tourism Australia Aussie specialist. That was the one training I always, when I came back to travel, having been away, that was the first training I redid. So booking Australia is, and I still talk about today, people. I had clients that I booked back in the 90s, Mr. and Mrs. Walton, they were called. Really lovely clients. They followed me from branch to branch, and they came in one day, and I'd not long been back from a trip to Australia on what we used to call an educational trip, or I think they now call them fan trip, familiarisation trip. And I'd been on this trip to Queensland in Australia, and I'd done these amazing things. And Mr. and Mrs. Wilson came in to see me one day, and they wanted to go to Hawaii. And so we were talking about this Hawaii holiday. We were looking at the options, and we were talking about my Australia trip, and we got some costs done for their Hawaii trip, and we put it all together, and I sent them off with their quotes to have a look through. And they came into the office a few days later and sort of sat down and said, "Look, we're really, really sorry, but we're not going to Hawaii." It was like, "Hey, no problem at all." They were like, "You've convinced us. We want to go to Australia instead." And that's it, is the fact that when it's something you're really passionate about, so much easier, because you're not selling it. You're just talking through the options. I mean, Australia saves ours. And the thing that I always remember about that trip, it was the first time I ever booked the Darn, which is the Australian train that runs from, I don't think it did the full route in those days, but it runs now from Adelaide to Darwin via the Red Centre. So you can stop for Adelaide, Alice Springs and the Red Centre, and Binaroo, Hayes Rock as it used to be known. And it was the first time I booked that, and I can remember being so excited. And it's something that I've always wanted to do myself since, because of making that booking. As much as they booked the trip on the back of things that I'd done, was something that they added in when they'd done a bit of research before they came back to me that they wanted to do. And every time I go to training and Jenny Beyond are there, I'm always like, I want to do it one day. And I will. I put it in my head for my 60th birthday.
Oh, you'll do it. I'm sure you will. I'm sure
Yeah,
you will.
I always love booking anything. And I had clients, well, this year, I guess, I was about to say last year. I guess by the time this goes out, it will be last year. I had clients
Yes.
this year in 2024 that did an amazing Australia trip. But it was part of the Great Ocean Road in Melbourne, which is one of my favourite places in the world. So being able to kind of it's making that personal recommendation. And as it happened, one of the hotels that we booked them into, I was at a training event as part of my Aussie specialist training a few weeks before they travelled. And the actual owner of the hotel at that event, that being able to sort of say to him, "Oh my God, I've got clients staying with you." And when you go to these events and they sort of put the ideas into your head and then you're able to book them and things like that, it's just, yeah, I love it.
Yes, I've been watching on catch up. I discovered I couldn't sleep the other night, so I was up. So then I'll watch something on iPlayer. And I was watching The Most Extraordinary Hotels in the World. I think that's what it's called, something like that. Have you seen it?
Monica Galetti from MasterChef.
Yes, with the yeah. So there's this one in Singapore. I think it was in Singapore. It's this like three tall columns with
Marina Bay.
yes, Marina Bay signs. And it was just incredible. Absolutely incredible.
To stay there. I went
No,
to
I mean,
Singapore on my way to Australia last time and I couldn't afford to stay there. But I did go to one of their restaurants for dinner just so I could say,
yeah. Yeah, no, they said a basic room would set you back £300. Like, thank you, but no thank
oh,
you. Not in my budget.
yes, for £300, you'd be really, really lucky.
Well, this, I think, was their first program. So I don't know when it was made. It was quite a few years ago. So it's probably much, much, much more than that. So what about the Olympics and the Euro 2022? How do they fit into this whole mix?
The Euro 2020 would never have happened without the Olympics, for sure. So the Olympics I would never have considered it particularly, but one of my best friends said to me, "It's your hometown. You have got to do it. You've got to volunteer." So we volunteered together. We didn't actually end up working together, but we volunteered together and we did a lot of our pre-stuff together, did our uniform collection together, which was a story in itself. And I just had a whale of a time. I mean, ironically, when I went to college, I did sport and leisure management. So travel was one of the options, which is how I got into travel. Sport management, I wanted to teach horse riding, which was how I went to college for. So I was doing sport and leisure management at college. So ironically, working at the Olympics kind of tied into what I did at college all those 30 odd years ago. But I just did what's called in those days event services. I was out in the stands, greeting customers, putting them to their seat. I was very lucky in the fact that most of the time I was on the edge of the royal box. So I got to see lots of exciting people come through.
Oh, wow.
But more importantly, I saw all the action. I mean, I was there more days than I wasn't. And I saw, I mean, we had an amazing Olympics I was the equestrian. We had an amazing year. Do you know what I mean? The dressage was brilliant. We won medals I think we won medals in everything that year. It was the one where the jumping guys got the gold with Nick Skelton, who obviously I followed since I was a child. So it was incredible. And anyway, because of that, I did some other bits of volunteering with the equestrian. And then because of my background in football, Euro 2020 came. And because I was actually working part-time for Watford Football Club, which I did for about 15 years from when I was temping as a PA up until I gave up this year. But because of my background in football, when I applied to do Euro 2020, which is at Wembley Stadium, and I live 20 minutes from Wembley Stadium, I was invited to be part of what they call the scout team, which was interviewing the volunteers. So
wow.
I was part of the interview team that interviewed all the volunteers that came to what should have been Euro 2020 and ended up being Euro 2021, of course. So what I applied for was just basically a 2-week volunteer position for 4-week volunteers to the Euros run for a month. I ended up being there for 6 months beforehand. But because obviously of COVID, we did all the interviews and we finished the interviews in the November of 2019, thinking we were delivering the tournament 6 months later. And we actually had our scout get together, as we called it, in the February. sort of as our kind of like farewell. We'd finished the interviewing, so we had like a bit of a celebration event in the February, and we were kind of all getting prepared to get together in the May for the tournament. Only for a month later, the
And
COVID
world stopped.
and
Yeah.
so
World's
so we ended up having, obviously everything got delayed for a year. So we ended up getting back together May 2021 instead of May 2020 for a very different tournament than we'd obviously got planned. I mean, because of COVID, we'd lost one of the venues. So we ended up with an extra game at Wembley. So I did that, which was just, and by that point I was working, we were able to, I was almost able to hand pick my job for that because of being the, we obviously had a look at what all the roles were, and I chose, and I worked in VIP ticketing. And it was just the most incredible. I had a great team leader, and it was phenomenal. We had such an amazing time, but it was the flexibility of being self-employed that allowed me to do the scout role. Because obviously it was during the week, and it was the year I was setting up the first year I was setting up in the business. No, it wasn't fully booked, so I had the time to like keep taking afternoons off to go and do the scout, the interviews, and some of it was the evening. So it would have been much harder to get involved to that level should I still been corporate. Obviously, again with the tournament, we had 8 games, and we had to be there the day before the game. So again, the flexibility of being self-employed made that such an easy thing for me to do and give back. And then on the back of that, because again, it was so close, we ended up being called back in because the women's Euros was the following year. Again, it should have been 2 years apart, but because they had such a core team together, we got called back to do the women's
yeah.
Euros the following year later. And then actually we got called back again. And I went this year, or 2024, and we did the Champions League final, which was the final, which was hosted at Wembley Stadium as well. So what started as applying for what I thought was going to be like a 4-week volunteering position has actually turned into a 5-year love affair, I guess. And there's a core team of us that we still meet up every few months. We still get together. And the beauty of volunteering, the beauty of being freelance that allowed me to do that and get out and meet the fantastic people that I now obviously probably be in my life forever.
That's fantastic. That is absolutely phenomenal. So I'm going to start wrapping up now. So I've been asking everybody when I wrap up, have you got any tips that you can share with our listeners
Mm.
about anything to do with being a corporate or virtual assistant?
Oh, right. Okay. On that side, I think one, take control of your own development. Just because your organization says no, be prepared to take that responsibility on yourself. So for me, I was always the one that I went to the PA show on my own back. Yes, I obviously was given the time off to go, but look at what you can make work for you. And I was lucky, and I did a couple of paid sessions that my company did pay for. But you've got to be prepared to take the responsibility to look for those opportunities yourself. Because sadly, corporately, the assisted community aren't always in the forefront of personal development. So you've got to be willing to look at the opportunities that you can make.
Fantastic. That is a really good piece of advice. And I think that holds true across whoever might be listening. You know, we have to take control of ourselves. Nobody is going to do anything for you. You have to decide what you want, and you just have to go for it. That doesn't mean being all gung ho and rude and horrible and obnoxious, because there are very nice ways to also take charge of
Yeah.
yourself. And I think that is a really cool tip. So, Jules, thank you so much. It's been such a lovely chat. Very different to our chat a few years ago on the other podcast. So it's been different. So if anybody was listening to that one, you've definitely got some different things out of this one, I'm sure. And all of Jules' contact details will be on the web page that will go along with the episode. And so you'll be able to get in touch with her and pick her brains or offer to work with her or employ her or what, go riding, whatever. I used to ride as a kid. I haven't ridden since I was 11.
I don't ride as
But
much myself
I
these days.
loved being around horses. We used to open the cupboard in the hall where my jodhpurs and boots lived, and it used to smell of horses and manure, and I just loved that. And everybody else was like, horrible.
Like, car, more actually for storage reasons, but yeah, they are kept healthy.
Yeah. Well, it's been a real pleasure to chat to you again, Jules, and I will sign off now. I'll sign off now for our listeners. So thank you for listening to this week's episode of Virtually Amazing Assistants, podcast for assistants everywhere, with me, Shelley Fishel, the MS Office Maestro, and my guest this week was Jules Taylor. And tune in again next week when I'll be live chatting with my next guest. To be advised.